Welcome back to AM Prime. Now, recently there have been numerous headlines regarding the plans that the government will implement regarding the liberalization of the nationally owned gas stations across the country. With this liberalization, private citizens and entities will now be able to own gas stations, and fuel prices, it seems, will be subject to market forces and owner discretion at the pumps. To get further insight into how it can affect the citizens of this country, we have our first guest, Ozzi Warwick, who is the Chief Education and Research Officer at the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. Ozzi also serves as the General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement. The OWTU is widely recognized as the strongest and most militant trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago and the Anglophone Caribbean. Welcome to AM Prime, Ozzi.
Thank you, Nikoli, for having me on your program this morning. I think it's a very important topic, and it's a topic that a lot of people don't realize has serious implications for their lives.
Mm-hmm. And so, jumping straight into it, there is a difference between what the government would have done, led by the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, over the years in terms of removing the subsidy, when you compare it to what the intention is right now in terms of liberalizing the fuel industry. Would you care to just explain the differences so that people have a proper understanding?
Yes, thanks. And I want to frame our discussion in the context of something called a just transition. Mm-hmm. So just transition is a term that was coined by trade unions to say that, listen, if we are going to transition into a low carbon world or whatever, then that transition has to be a just one. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, I would argue that the government is transitioning our society to a different type of society that is not just in any way, but actually quite opposite. In other words, they are trying to transition us into a society where it's completely market forces that determine prices, liberalized the entire economy with no protection for the vulnerable, a complete dismantling of the social protection and social security infrastructure that we've put in place. Mm-hmm. So that the liberalization of fuel distribution, along with the removal of subsidies, are all part of this package or a part of a policy framework to transition Trinidad and Tobago society into a very different one, where, to say quite frankly, our quality of life will be severely impacted in a negative way. So let's break it into the two parts, and let's just start with the subsidies aspect. Now, let's be clear about what subsidies are. It is the only mechanism, Nikoli, the only mechanism to guarantee that all people benefit from the natural resources produced. Now, once you remove it, then there is no mechanism to guarantee the distribution of wealth from our natural resources. We will be completely open to the market forces, to decisions of boardrooms and shareholders, so that the only beneficiaries of the natural resources will revert right back to multinationals and big private capital, like how it was in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So we are actually going back. Now, policy elites, including politicians and some economists, they like to say that the fossil fuel subsidy should go, right? So that a decade ago, you had like a group of 20 leaders. They said that you have to rationalize and phase out government support for oil and gas and so on, a decision that, of course, was supported by the IMF and WTO. The problem is that this call is actually framed in ways that seek to legitimize and universalize neoliberal approaches to energy transition. And that is what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. It is a move towards a neoliberal construct of our society, which is being pursued aggressively by this government. And what does that entail? It entails the removal of the subsidies completely, liberalization of fuels distribution. So we back to the old days of multinationals, but they say, for example, that it's going to be private persons, but we all know how that ends up. That is just a small monopoly that will end up owning a whole set of gas stations. And then you have the complete privatization of the energy value chain, from production refining, and now distribution. So that what we are going through really is an unjust transition back to the days of the domination of private and foreign capital in energy, back to the days where ordinary people in Trinidad and Tobago will not be benefiting from the natural resources of the country. And in fact, what is even worse, Nikoli, is not just that we will not be benefiting from the natural resources, but we are the ones going to have to pay for that, because once you remove the subsidies, of course, the increase in fuel cost automatically means increase in transportation cost, increase in food prices, increase in goods and services. And we have to pay close attention to the timing of this liberalization of fuel distribution and removal of the subsidies. You notice that they didn't do it when oil prices were lower. They're doing it when oil price is high. And oil price is expected to remain high for a while as the global economy opens. So what Trinidad and Tobagonians are going to be faced with at the pump is, in fact, a significant increase in fuel cost. And that now is on top of an already burdened person who are already facing an increase in the food prices. That has already happened. Increase in your rent, increase in water rates. And whilst they may say they haven't started, I can tell you that they have started increasing water rates to about 35% for residential users. There have been an increase in the cost of basic household items. This now is coupled with massive job losses. And then you have increase in electricity maybe coming. And then you have property tax on top of that. So you have persons, the majority of Trinbagonians, who have either lost their jobs, lost their income, or have a reduction in their income, now facing increased food prices, increased rent, increased water rate, increased cost of basic household items. And then you have, on top of all of that, increased fuel costs in terms of, one, removal of the subsidies, and two, the liberalization of the fuel distribution. Sure. It is neoliberal policies being shoved down the throats of the population. And we, at the end of the day, are going to be the ones who will have to bear the full economic burden for such policies.
So in terms of the population seeing it that way, because we do have a population here in Trinidad and Tobago that may be privy to these interviews, to newspaper headlines, to editorials and so forth, but there is still that support for the government in respect of going back to the polls, voting them. So we had them, the government in 2015, and during that period, 2015 to 2020, there would have been the removal of the subsidies and so forth, and a number of policy positions that did not augur well for the country as a whole. But then we saw the government coming back into 2020 for this next 5-year period. Do you think that it's a matter of the population just really having that 9-day memory or whatever it is? Because if this is so strenuous on the population, why do we continue to support these positions or this government that makes these decisions inevitably that will affect us?
Let me say that, let me first burst this bubble of so-called support for government, especially for the government supporters, right? The fact is that they receive 28% of the votes of the electorate, just 28%. And this is what is unfortunate of our governance model. So you have a government in place with only 28% of the electoral support, yet imposing policies that are going to have very wide-ranging implications for the rest of the society. Now, the question would be, why didn't the other 72% come out in full force to reject these policies? And of course, that is because of our traditional politics being grounded in, and let's be frank, in race, religion, geography. There's absolutely no other reason. Because if we were to take it strictly on a policy perspective and not based on tribal politics, let's say, what policies are you coming to the country with? There would be a massive rejection of those policies. You notice that they didn't say that they were coming to do all of this in either the 2015 elections and even in the 2020 elections. Sure. They didn't come to the population and say, guess what? we are going to impose upon you neoliberal policies that will have complete privatization of the energy sector. We are going to close down our refinery. We are going to import the products. We are going to liberalize. You notice they didn't say that. So they came to, they came to the population, and we as a society was not able to put aside this traditional grounding of race, religion, geography, put that aside and say, what policies are you coming with? And then even when voted in, once you see what the policies are, then you reject those policies by way of...
I think that we are experiencing a bit of issues. Ozzy, are you there? Yeah, go ahead. I think you're muted.
I was saying that
Yes.
You would have seen a rejection of those policies once those policies began to be shoved down the throat of the population through mass mobilization. But we have to put aside these traditional political grounding in race and religion and geography. Once we could put that aside, I think you would see the mass movement coming together to reject these policies, because these policies are not good for Trinidad and Tobago. And the fact is that, let's just look at that. You're talking about an increase at the pump that could double. When that happens, you're talking about transportation costs. That is trying to get your children to and from school, as you trying to get to and from work. Then you're talking about increase. Of course, once transportation costs go up, it's not just the traveling public, but it's the transportation of goods. So that will go up, including food and other retail items. And therefore, and all that is happening whilst your income not moving. So it is going to be a period of what we can consider to be a very unjust transition.
Yes.
A very unequal transition, a very inequitable transition that, to say quite frankly, Nikoli, is going to lead to a society of greater inequality. It's going to lead to a society where the quality of life of ordinary people is going to be one of day-to-day struggle just to make ends meet. And it's going to be a society in which it's literally going to have the survival of the fittest. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, that the type of society we really want?
Well, then the question I'm going to ask you and the OWTU is, what is the approach that you all are going to take in order to push back against this, in order to get the population to see it for what you've laid out there? What is the approach that we can expect from you guys?
Well, I want to also say that the government is also using this COVID-19 to suppress dissent through the state of emergency. Let's just be frank about that. So they know fully well that this is a good timing to shove these things down our throats, because if you as a one person go and stand up in front of the parliament, as what happened to a young gentleman, you are hauled off by the police. So but here's what we say to that. It's going to end. The SOE will come to an end, Nikoli. And mark my word, when that SOE has come to an end, you would see an aggressive mobilization that we have not seen in a long time. And we will not allow the government to simply dust their clothes and walk away from all of this. Because let's just think about what has just happened over the last few weeks. Whilst people suffering and struggling, they're buying luxury cars and telling the population who facing increased food prices, increased rent, increase in basic goods and so on. They're telling you greedy because you're struggling just to put some food on your table. I mean, that I think must have annoyed a majority of the population. Yes. And I think a majority of the population is just waiting for the progressive movement to make a move. And mark my word, we will make that move.
Understood. My final question, because unfortunately our time has run out, but has there been any attempt by the Minister of Finance or the Minister rather of Energy and Energy Industries to engage the OWTU or the Joint Trade Union movement on this issue at all?
No. the basic answer is no. In fact, we would have seen just after Labor Day, the Minister of Energy making certain pronouncements in the media. We are yet to receive an invitation to have a sit down and a discussion around this issue. And I just want to say that to Trinidad and Tobago, this issue of fuel subsidy and the liberalization of fuel distribution is not an OWTU issue. It is a national issue because every single one of us, Nikoli, is going to be severely impacted. Not just the unions, not just our members, not just the workers, but across the board, the entire population, we will feel the full brunt of this unjust and inequitable transition.
And the sad reality is that many people still have not taken the time to really grasp this because they are so distracted by so many other things and just basic living and surviving during this pandemic. And I guess it ties into what you're saying in terms of the government seeing this as a perfect opportunity to present this where the population is already under strain and distracted. Coronavirus is something that is really restricting movement and opportunities and so forth. And I guess that we will continue to liaise with you, Ozzi, and the OWTU yes. and the Joint Trade Union movement to see how this thing pans out and to see if this can in fact be an opportunity for a victory for the people by pushing back against it and being successful in that effort. So I want to thank you so much for joining me this morning, sharing the insight that you've shared with us, and really for fighting for the people of Trinidad and Tobago in this respect.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to other discussions with you.
Excellent. And that was Ozzi Warwick, the Chief Education and Research Officer of the OWTU, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more for you here on AM Prime. Stay with us.